I searched and searched for the appropriate song to welcome in Hampton Sides. I passed on Ice Ice Baby and Cold as Ice by Foreigner.
Thank you.
They would be insulting to the man.
Yes, it would.
So I have gone with the Thin Ice, which the USS Jeanette could have used some more of. Hampton Sides' book is called In the Kingdom of Ice. It is a remarkable piece of work. When I got it, I got my highlight pen out as if I were going to school, and I did.
It certainly is a lesson.
It's a remarkable piece of work. He's the author of Ghost Soldiers and Blood and Thunder and Hellhound on His Trail. He was here last for that, and we asked him what he was doing next. And he said a book about this naval ship, this journey that went awry.
And that was 4 years ago when we talked.
How long has it been, old friend?
It's been at least 3 years. 3.5 years is usually about how long it takes me to do these things. I wish I could write faster and get on your show a little more often.
Well, it'd be nice to see you
doesn't work
more
that way.
often, but this was the word laborious, detailed. I'm not sure how to even approach it. In the epilogue, you mentioned that you were in Norway, and the spark was ignited there. What spurned this entire concept?
Yeah, I was in Norway doing a story for National Geographic magazine about a Norwegian explorer named Fridtjof Nansen, who had tried to duplicate the voyage, he said, of the USS Jeanette, but in a different kind of vessel. And I was like, USS Jeanette, what's that? It's an American voyage. I'm American, never heard of it.
Right.
Filed that away and got home and began to just burrow into this ice hole, and found that it was just a huge, extremely well-known sensation in its day, 1880s. But nobody I talked to had ever even heard of it. So that's a good starting point for a book. Instead of writing yet another book about Lincoln or Franklin,
Or Teddy Roosevelt, or the Civil War.
yeah. So I filed that away and just kept digging into this thing, and it's an amazing story. It
really is.
It's probably the grittiest, most harrowing, survival story I'd ever encountered, and I figured this is a good time to get into this because it involves Russia, it involves the Arctic, and it involves this mythic concept of the open polar sea, which they were trying to find, and which climate folks tell us there actually will be an open polar sea, at least during the summertime, within the next 50 years or so.
Well, back then there was not, and there was some kind of obsession among people to find out what was at the North Pole. Much to me like some years after that are what's on the moon obsession. But this came well before that. And in 1879, on July 8th, the USS Jeanette, that was once called the Pandora, but was purchased by this lunatic who I wish I could have met, James Gordon Bennett, a newspaper magnate, and I also made a note that you wrote that he and that newspaper, one of the first ones to try to create news and not report it. So that wasn't Fox and ESPN.
No, they've been doing it for a long time.
This guy started it.
It goes way back.
He's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, he sent Stanley to Africa to find Livingston, even though Livingston wasn't really lost, created a newspaper sensation. They covered the news as well, but they also had this notion that if you can sort of orchestrate events that produce news, all the better. And he knew that if he sent a vessel to the Arctic, it would probably get into trouble, and there'd be more vessels sent after it to look for it, and it would be this gift that kept on giving, and it worked, and it worked for him.
And he was one of those guys that didn't have the problem of making his own news.
Yeah.
He was quite the socialite in New York, and would like to ride his sleigh naked through town
and ride a horse into social events. And one of my favorite lines in the book, to show you my sophomoric tastes,
he got to empty the bilge.
Urination. He was pumping out the bilge either into the piano or the fireplace. We know not which.
Yeah, he was a big spoiled brat. He was a Gilded Age, larger than life cat who just did whatever he wanted. And he just decided during a very nice party at a very nice salon, in New York, at the home of his fiancée, to urinate in the grand piano. And this got him ostracized. It ended up, he was flogged in the streets, and then there was a duel, and then he was exiled to Paris, and he created his own world in Paris.
That's a book in itself.
Yeah, this guy is. Hampton Sides is our guest. The new book is In the Kingdom of Ice. And so our real hero here is George Washington DeLong, a Navy lieutenant who was given the task of this journey, and he and 32 men, I guess it was, loaded up. The list of supplies here is just incredible. They're planning for this 3-year event,
Right.
and they were going into completely uncharted territory with visions of things that were completely wrong. How could they have been so wrong?
Yeah.
Scientists and everybody had missed this entirely.
Yeah, well, there's this concept called the open polar sea that goes way back to the Greeks and the Vikings, and people just desperately wanted to believe in it. And they've been studying the Gulf Stream, which is indeed a very powerful warm water current that heads north. And the idea was that there's also another current on the Pacific side called the Kuroshio, which is a Japanese current. It means black current in Japanese. And the idea was that these two enormous warm water currents went to the north, tunneled under the ice, and converged at the North Pole. And it was like this big heat regulation system of the planet. And so the concept was find this current, because the idea is that it would tunnel under the ice, soften the ice, and create kind of a gateway to this open polar
Right.
sea. And of course, they went north through the Bering Strait, north of Alaska, did not find this thermometric gateway, as they called it. They got promptly stuck in the ice, and they drifted not for 2 weeks, not for 2 months, but 2 years.
Yeah.
Until the enormous pressure of the ice finally crushed.
About 22 months in,
hull,
it
yeah.
just exploded. I mean, sap was oozing from the wood that was
Mhm.
the support system of this massive ship.
Yeah, I mean, and they've been, reinforced for the ice. They knew they
Yeah.
were going to encounter some ice, but eventually it succumbed. The ship, the Jeanette, sinks to the bottom of the Arctic Ocean, and these 33 men and their 40 dogs are out there, SOL, with barest of supplies and 3 small, rickety, open boats that they have
Yeah.
to drag south towards the nearest landmass, which is the central coast of Siberia.
And shockingly, their fortunes and their attitudes went up and down. And one day, they're depressed and things are awful. The next day, they shoot a walrus and a polar bear to keep eating, and yeehaw, it's on again.
Yeah.
And up and down and up and down. But they somehow managed to keep their attitudes and their hopes alive during all this, which is just remarkable in itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great story of leadership and camaraderie and teamwork. They're literally fighting for their lives
Yeah.
to get south before winter. They've got a few months to do this. The low moment was when they realized, after a whole week of just struggling over the ice, that they took a positional reading and realized that the ice was shifting north faster than they were traveling south.
Right.
So they were retrogressing, actually, after all this incredible effort. And I guess that you could say that's sort of a metaphor for a lot of things in life. We all have bad days or bad weeks, but this was a
Yeah.
low moment for DeLong and his men. They
Yes, it
realized
was.
they've been going backwards for a whole week.
Yeah, it is just a harrowing, as everybody says. It's a thriller, it's a narrative, it is a novelization of history, and the reviews for it. I haven't seen a Time magazine give a book review 2 pages in a long, long time. That must make you feel good.
It was a good week last week, yeah.
Sure was.
The reviews have been great. The response has been interesting, and a little bit of movie interest, but nothing.
I was
nothing
afraid
hard
to
and
ask
fast.
that.
Nothing,
Is that
nothing hard and fast?
How can Hollywood take a work like this and hope to put it on the screen and not screw it up? There's
Well,
so much happening here.
Yeah, there's a lot happening, but the problem is with these Arctic stories is these guys are
It's cold.
These guys are in furs, and they all look the same.
Yeah.
They have to somehow identify each person's color coding. I don't know how they do it, but supposedly the Arctic stories have really run into that problem. Why the Shackleton story hasn't been done as a major motion picture yet,
Right.
for example.
Hampton Sides is our guest. The book is In the Kingdom of Ice, the Grand and Terrible Polar Voyage of the USS Jeanette. In Outside Magazine, which you are an editor of ongoingly, you write in great detail about your 6 weeks journey to sort of relive and go to where these men went.
Right.
And that in itself is a tale that is to be read.
Yeah.
That was a pretty long 6 weeks for you, from airplane to airplane,
Yeah.
and little boats, and freezing your ass off, and meeting people, and
Getting eaten alive by
Summarized.
mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's two seasons in this part of the year. There's winter and mosquito, and I went during mosquito, and but it's a very remote part of the world. They made landfall eventually in a place called the Lena Delta, which is the delta of one of the world's largest rivers, and it's just hundreds of islands and back channels and oxbow lakes and infested with mosquitoes. it turns out.
desolation full of bugs.
Right.
That's why nobody lives
That's
there.
why there's nobody there.
Yeah, I mean it's permafrost. It's just under the surface. It's frozen, and there's no timber. It's pretty bleak. There's a tribe called the Yakuts who live there, but it's very hard to get to and nearly uninhabited. It's also part of a larger Russian military zone.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
Multiple permits to get there. They looked at me, like I was crazy
Yeah.
because no one went there. No one goes there voluntarily. It was
Right.
historically a place like the Tsar sent you there, or
Mhm.
Stalin sent you to the gulags there, but no one voluntarily went there.
And
So-
they were amazed that you wanted to go there because you're going to write a book about it, and
Yeah.
they gave you this, what are you, nuts look?
A little bit, although you'd be surprised how many people in Russia have heard of the DeLong expedition because his group was eventually saved there and welcomed by the whole nation, and they met the Tsar.
Right.
And more people, I think, there have heard of it than here in the United States. So
Yeah,
it's interesting.
that was a long time ago, but nonetheless, the story has reemerged. Hampton Sides is here. The new book is out. As I read this, I was trying to picture how you did research. I could see you with stacks of books around you and 18 monitors,
yeah.
and wondering how in the hell did he lay all this out. There were journals back in that day, and people wrote so beautifully.
Yeah.
And Emma, DeLong's wife, and he exchanged some beautiful letters,
Yeah.
very romantic, and
Mhm.
and those days are so gone.
Yeah.
Just the art of writing letters and keeping journals. But
It-
were
it-
those
it
the
take-
main source of all of your details?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about that. How would you do a book now based on the kind of correspondence? that we
Google
do
it.
and texting.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'd be texting each other.
Yeah.
How's it going?
Love
Freezing
you,
my
honey.
ass off.
Cold.
Yeah, love
Yeah.
you too.
Yeah, but what happened with the research for this? I did have this one experience that was, kind of like the historian's dream, which is phone call with a little old lady who has a trunk full of letters in the attic that she's about to throw away. Would you please come and take them off my hands? And this was a woman named Catherine DeLong in Connecticut.
Yeah.
I flew there as quickly as I could get there. I got these letters, and she loaned them all to me, the whole trunk. And they were the letters of Emma DeLong. They were these love letters. There were photographs, maps, everything. And she wrote these letters that she called her letters to nowhere, that she sent north in the to the Arctic in these whaling vessels, hoping somehow, some way they would reach her husband. They never did reach him, but they're beautiful.
Yes,
and
they
they're
are.
haunting. And then, as the story progresses, it becomes really gut-wrenching
Yes.
just to hear what she's saying, and then cut to what's really happening with him and his men.
Just her
out on the
hope and
ice.
her longing and her desperation to have him home, and at the same time, he is living in the worst conditions possible. You have time for a little bit more?
Yeah.
We'll do a short break, and we'll come back and talk to our friend Hampton Sides. The new book is out now, In the Kingdom of Ice. We'll be back in just a moment. Talking to Hampton Sides, the fine author of many books. The most recent one came out last week, In the Kingdom of Ice, the tale of the USS Jeanette and its ill-fated voyage many, many years ago. Anything else happening with other books? Is Hellhound still hovering about and being discussed for anything, movies or anything like that?
Universal has optioned it again for like the third time, and they want to do something with it. But so far, I'm just skeptical. I never, until I'm actually eating popcorn and like sitting
Watching
in a
it.
theater,
Yeah.
I don't believe it's going to happen. So
So
We'll
on
see.
Friday, you had a great turnout at the Laurelwood Booksellers to come and meet you and sign the book. Did you read some or just discuss?
I mainly showed slides, actually,
Oh.
of my trip to Siberia and talked about the, those journeys to get, sort of in the wake of the Jeanette expedition. Huge crowd. It was great to see a lot of friends. I can always extort books out of my friends and family here.
That's important.
But it was like, I don't know, maybe 200 people there. Tons of books that I signed of stock that are there if anyone wants to pick up a copy. Great bookstore, one of the great ones around the country. I mean,
Yes.
I go all over the place, and it's truly one of the best.
So are you touring the country for this book?
Absolutely. 30 city tour. This is stop number 4, I think.
Wow.
Heading down to Jackson. I was in Oxford yesterday.
Square books.
Yep. And I'm going to be in Nashville next. So it moves. It's moving all over the country.
So do you ever get tired of this discussion about this incredible story? There are so many angles, and I made so many notes I'll never get to.
Yeah, just for example, I was blown away by the Philadelphia Exposition
Yes.
of 1876,
Right,
the
right.
100-year anniversary of our country. And the way you present that and paint that picture, I could see it in my head, this giant machine that's running all of these other machines, and the wonderment that people have with everything from telephones to kudzu.
To bananas.
To bananas.
Of all the kudzu thing, I went, so that's where kudzu came from.
Yeah, thanks.
And so thanks, yeah, because it's taken over, well, at least this quarter of the country anyway.
And
Yeah.
Mr. Edison's lights
Right.
were on preview there, and were also on the ship. And they counted on those lights to illuminate the night once darkness began to come in early,
Yeah, but
and they didn't work.
they weren't quite ready for prime time. Almost, but not quite. And this story is a kind of a series of those near misses and almosts.
Yeah.
It's like, it seems like it's an accumulation of those kinds of things. Edison, had these arc lights and this dynamo that he was using to power it, and they brought them up to the Arctic. And as soon as it started to get dark, DeLong tried to flip the switch, and it just fizzled. It just didn't work, and so they just weren't quite ready.
And several months later, they were ready,
Yeah.
but it was a bit too late at that time. And the other things, God, they had cases of Budweiser and tobacco and every food imaginable.
And we talked about that the other day. We're going to need a bigger boat if we're going to be gone for 3 years.
Yes.
There's going to have to be a hell of a lot more Budweiser to get me through this kind of a.
yeah, it's kind of hard to gauge the size of that ship
Yeah.
based upon the pictures.
Yeah, it's not huge.
It wasn't that big comparatively, I guess, to things these days you see, like these yachts that cruise and all that stuff.
Yeah, not at all. And in fact, Gordon Bennett, who we talked about earlier, had many larger yachts that he kept all
Yeah.
around the world. One of which was called the Lysistrata.
Yeah.
And it had, among other things, padded rooms for his dairy cows, so that he could have fresh cream aboard. So while he's gallivanting around the Mediterranean in his yacht, his ship, the Jeanette, is fighting in the ice in much more Spartan circumstances. But I mean, they were equipped. They knew it was going to be a long time. They had a lot of entertainments. They had an amazing library.
Yeah.
They had an organ. They
A
had
big Christmas Day party with theater and shows.
in musicals. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not like they actually suffered that much during the 2 years that they were locked in the ice. It was only after the vessel was crushed and sank that their travails really began.
And there were several, was it 3 ships that were sent in search of them that
Yeah.
turned out to be completely pointless?
Yeah, I mean, they went up into the Arctic on both sides. One ship was sent up by Norway. Another ship went back through the Bering Strait, looking for the Jeanette, looking for any tidings of the vessel. Aboard one of those ships was John Muir, the great environmentalist, who was then a scrappy newspaper reporter from San Francisco. And he wrote about it beautifully, and he becomes a major character in the last third of the book.
And you also had some observations in the outside piece about that part of the country and or that part of the world today, and the possibilities that exist all these years later for something to really be productive in that area.
Well, I guess it's one of the things about climate change. It's like suddenly you can get to this place.
Yeah.
Eco-tourism has started. There's people actually going to this place called Wrangell Island, which is the world's largest denning ground for polar bear. Of course, there's an increased interest in, I guess petrochemicals and
Transference of oil and gas and those kind of things.
right,
Yeah.
and the Russians are certainly pressing their claims on the territory up there.
Yeah.
A lot of these islands were discovered during the Jeannette expedition, and were, we raised a flag over these islands
Yeah.
and claimed them for the United States, but we didn't really press our claims, and now they're all Russian islands now. The Delong Islands, Wrangel Island, the New Siberian Islands. So there's an increased interest in that whole part of the world now.
Well, it's all here in this remarkable piece of work by Hampton Sides in the Kingdom of Ice. It's a story of the USS Jeannette. It is a remarkable tale, and it's all true, although it reads like a thriller, and but it's fact. So after you tour and after you shake hands and discuss this and sign more books, do you take any downtime, or do you turn to your next daunting task?
Well, I have 3 kids to put through college, so I
Just
can't.
keep working, bro.
I can't
You
take too
can't
much time
stop.
off.
Yeah.
But this is kind of a honeymoon period right now. I do like to have a little, at least a few months where I'm just trying to figure out what's next. I got 2 or 3 book ideas, and I'll probably figure it out in the next month. or 2.
We'll have like Hampton Sides explains cricket or something like that.
No, that's inexplicable.
Yeah, you can't do it. There's not enough pages.
Well, it's always a pleasure to spend time with you, and we hope that people will put down the James Patterson for a few minutes and read a real book, Hampton Sides in the Kingdom of Ice. Happy trails. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you guys.
We'll be back in just a moment.